Colombia's National Strike Committee has announced that the government of Iván Duque refuses to sign a pre-agreement established at the beginning of the week, describing it as a tactic to delay the start of fresh talks. The United Nations has welcomed the decision reached by Somalia's leaders to hold presidential and parliamentary elections within 2 months, following 5 days of intense negotiations. Syrians are celebrating the successful holding of presidential elections, in which Bashar alAsad secured a 4th term in office. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Colombia's National Strike Committee announced on Thursday that the government of President Iván Duque refuses to sign a pre-agreement established at the beginning of the week as a means to resume negotiations to end the ongoing nationwide mobilizations. The committee stressed that this is a delaying tactic as the Duque government continues to allow the violent repression of protesters. The two sides reached a pre-agreement late on Monday, which includes, among other points, the decriminalization of the peaceful protests that have been taking place across the country for the past month. In order to resume talks, the National Strike Committee had demanded an end to the use of firearms by the security forces against protesters, the withdrawal of the army from the streets during mobilizations, and that a protocol for the prevention of sexual violence by security forces be enforced. As the government continues to fail to meet basic demands, the committee informed that it will establish its own dialogue with young people, students, representatives of agricultural sectors, indigenous peoples, teachers and spokespersons from different cities. This Friday marks a month of nationwide mobilizations against the neoliberal policies of the Duque government, which have been met with brutal repression by security forces, including the murders of more than 40 peaceful protesters. A series of cultural activities, including concerts, street theatre, marches and artistic performances, are planned across the country this Friday.
It is a delaying action of the government to sign what has been agreed, and therefore this stalling attitude that does not understand the complexity of the current situation makes the government of President Iván Duque, who refuses to sign the guarantee agreement, responsible for the strike.
And as the nationwide anti-government protests in Colombia continue, young volunteers are bringing relief to those facing the violent state repression. By day, these youth work in a range of sectors, but by night they dodge tear gas and stun grenades to relieve those injured by the police, as unprecedented social unrest continues across Colombia. In a month of protests, over 60 people have been reported dead, with security forces implicated in the killing of 43, according to the NGO Temblores. On May 24th, Armando Alvarez, a doctor providing care to demonstrators in the southwestern city of Cali, which has been an epicenter of the protests, was shot dead as he left his workplace. In the face of such episodes, many volunteers remain anonymous as they work to attend to people suffocated by tear gas or hit with pellets and stun grenades thrown by the police. The most serious cases are injuries to the face and eyes as a result of the deliberate police tactic of aiming at protesters' heads. And Colombia's Arauca Rural Workers Association denounced on Thursday that there have been mass and illegal detentions of its leaders in the midst of the 30th day of the national strike mobilizations against the neoliberal policies of the government of Iván Duque. The association indicated that in the early hours of Thursday, members of the Colombian army and the national police carried out an operation in which the homes of farmers and community leaders, municipal councillors and departmental officials were searched. The organisation denounced that several people were illegally detained, among them the president of the association, Anderson Rodriguez, as well as its vice president and human rights secretary, John Alexander Romero. The association described the operation as a direct attack against the leadership of the association, which is part of the long list of systematic and repressive attacks that the state has unleashed against rural communities. An investigation by an environmental NGO has revealed that the French supermarket giant Casino, with branches in Colombia, is linked to illegal deforestation of the Amazon and the payment of armed groups operating in the country. The Environment Investigation Agency, with offices in London and Washington, D.C., revealed that meat sold by supermarkets in Bogotá and other Colombian cities is linked to illegal deforestation, specifically in the Chiribiquete National Park, the largest tropical rainforest national park in the world, as well as the Macarena Park, where at least 400 hectares were illegally deforested. The retail chain was also accused of supporting armed groups involved in these activities. The company has denied any implication in these crimes. Peru's presidential candidates Pedro Castillo and Keiko Fujimori are advancing in their respective electoral campaigns ahead of the second round vote to be held on June 6. Both candidates are continuing their campaign activities to make their government proposals known. A presidential debate will be held on Sunday, in which left candidate Castillo and his far-right rival for the post, Fujimori, will make a final bid to secure votes from a population that has experienced several years of political instability and mobilised in huge numbers to denounce the corruption that pervades the political elites of the country. The vote also comes in the aftermath of a massacre registered in a rural community and attacks from right-wing lawmakers against the president of the country's electoral authority. According to analysts, this is a political strategy from right sectors to prevent Pedro Castillo from making it to the presidency. Ten former soldiers and police officers have been arrested in Guatemala, accused of several crimes committed during the country's civil war. The former officers are accused of carrying out extrajudicial executions, abductions, torture, rape, and the forced disappearance and murders of at least 183 people between 1983 and 1985. Among those arrested is retired General Marco Antonio González Taracena, who headed the clandestine intelligence network of the Presidential General Staff at the time, as well as several of his subordinates. The crimes came to light because of a police document covering the period dubbed the Military Diary. This Friday, the Cuban Parliament held a hearing on the need for the lifting of the US blockade convened by the International Relations, Health, Sports and Constitutional Affairs Committees. During the meeting, lawmakers highlighted the effects of the genocidal policy of the United States government against the country. Likewise, members of Parliament and international guests reiterated their commitment to the fight for an end to the blockade. On June 23rd, for the 28th time, Cuba will submit for consideration to the United Nations General Assembly the resolution entitled Necessity of Ending the Economic, Commercial and Financial Blockade imposed by the US government against Cuba. Since its first presentation in the 1990s, this resolution has received almost unanimous support from the international community, which has called for the immediate lifting of the blockade. However, the US government maintains this policy and has even tightened it with extra unilateral coercive measures. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The United Nations has welcomed the decision reached by Somalia's leaders to hold presidential and parliamentary elections within 2 months, following 5 days of intense negotiations in Mogadishu, the country's capital. In early April, the lower house of the federal parliament adopted a special law to extend the mandates of President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed and the current parliament for 2 more years, abandoning a landmark electoral agreement reached on September 17, 2020. Opposition to these moves led to the mobilization of militias and exposed divisions within the security forces. Led by Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble, the agreement reached on Thursday concluded a federal government of Somalia and federal member states summit that the United Nations and other diplomatic partners have described as a critical opportunity to advance peace and security in the country.
We urge all stakeholders to move forward swiftly in the same spirit of compromise and cooperation to implement this agreement. We further encourage the FGS and FMS leaders to continue regular consultations throughout the electoral process to ensure any emerging disputes can be resolved quickly. It is important that updated timelines for the Upper House, House of the People, and presidential elections be issued as soon as possible. We also look forward to rapid establishment of election implementation bodies at federal and state level and full implementation of the Election Security Committee.
Mali's coup leader announced on Friday that a new prime minister will be appointed within days in his first remarks since seizing power for the second time in 9 months this week. Army officer Assimi Goïta made the announcement during a meeting with political and civil society figures in Bamako as international pressure rises on the country's ruling military junta following the arrest and subsequent resignation of the country's interim president and prime minister earlier this week. Representatives of the M5 RFP protest movement told a press conference that Goïta intended to give the post of prime minister to their movement and that it would be taken up by Dr. Choguel Maïga, president of the Patriotic Movement for Renewal Party. This Friday, Germany formally recognised as genocide the crimes committed by its colonial troops at the beginning of the 20th century against the Herero and Nama peoples in what is now Namibia. This is the first time that Berlin has recognised the atrocities committed, with the declaration coming after 5 years of negotiations. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas stated that as a way to recognise the immense suffering inflicted on the victims, Germany would support the country's development through a programme worth more than €1 billion. The agreement will reportedly see funding paid over 30 years through spending on infrastructure, healthcare and training programmes benefiting the impacted communities. Present-day Namibia was under German occupation from 1884 to 1915. Descendants of the Herero and Nama minorities have sought to win damages over genocide and property seizures by colonists for years, including through United States courts.
The Germans gave my grandmother hardship. She ran alone. She grew up among foreign people. She was forced to speak a foreign language, and we are living in poverty because of what they did to us at the time. Now we want them to restore our dignity. Reparation must come, and we want our land back.
On Friday, Malaysia's Prime Minister announced that the country will go into a nationwide lockdown for all social and economic sectors from June 1st to June 14th. The announcement came as the country recorded more than 800 new coronavirus cases in 24 hours, its fourth straight day of record infections. This number brings the total confirmed cases since the beginning of the pandemic to more than 500,000. During the new lockdown, only absolutely essential economic sectors and services will be allowed to operate. The countries continue to record new highs in COVID-19 infections and deaths throughout May, despite 3 weeks of moderate restrictions under the Movement Control Order. For the second time this week, Indian health authorities reported a fall in the number of daily confirmed coronavirus cases this Friday at under 200,000. Such numbers have not been recorded since mid-April, leaving behind the peak of 400,000 confirmed cases per day at the beginning of May. Friday saw the lowest increase in new infections since April, but experts warn the official figures fall short of the reality. India has reported over 27.5 million cases since the beginning of the pandemic, a figure only surpassed by the United States. The drastic drop in the number of cases contrasts with the number of deaths, which remains high at an average of 3,000 per day. In this context, authorities announced a gradual withdrawal of restrictions in the capital from Monday due to the fall in cases there. On Friday, the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, and the Greek government presented the European Digital Vaccination Certificate against COVID-19 in Athens, a common tool to be implemented throughout the European Union to facilitate travel within the Schengen area.
Demonstration. It is very, very simple. Essentially, it includes all the information that a member state would need to welcome a traveler without imposing additional restrictions. Proof of vaccination, a proof of negative test, PCR or antigen, or a proof of illness.
Parliament, and we will be able to implement this COVID certificate in the next days, in the next weeks. But I'm very proud to be here for the first time in Greece. You announced this important tool that will be implemented and that will be key for our citizens everywhere in Europe. And
Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin announced that the nation would reopen pubs and international travel as its vaccine campaign continues to advance.
An important time for us all. After the trauma of the last 15 months, we are finally taking definite steps towards enjoying normal times with friends and loved ones again. So, from the 2nd of June, hotels, B&Bs, guest houses and self-catering accommodation can reopen for guests, and from the 7th of June, outdoor services and bars and restaurants can recommence. But subject to us continuing to make progress, we will move to the next phase of reopening. And this will mean that from the 5th of July, we will see the return of indoor services in restaurants and bars.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad won the presidential elections held on Wednesday with 95.1% of the vote to secure a fourth term in office. The Speaker of the People's Assembly announced the results at a press conference on Thursday, detailing that the president gained over 13.5 million ballots. With an electoral register inside and outside Syria of over 18.1 million, a total of over 14.2 million voters cast their ballots, representing turnout of 78.64%. The two other presidential candidates, former State Minister Abdallah Salum Abdallah and opposition figure Mahmoud Merhi, received 1.5% and 3.3% of the vote, respectively. And Syrian President Bashar al-Assad expressed his gratitude on Friday for the patriotism and huge turnout in Wednesday's election. The president also paid tribute to the fallen martyrs and those wounded in the ongoing armed conflict with Western-backed terrorists. Al-Assad called to work to rebuild the country in honour of the sacrifices of all those who've lost their lives and for the future of Syria's children and youth. In this context, Russia's foreign ministry stated that the presidential elections in Syria were a sovereign affair of the country and an important step towards strengthening its internal stability. And Syrians took to the streets across the country to celebrate the re-election of President Bashar al-Assad in Wednesday's presidential election. In the capital, Damascus, huge crowds gathered to watch a firework display as the country celebrated another victory in the consolidation of its political stability and the strengthening of its sovereignty in the face of ongoing Western and terrorist attacks. The Palestinian Colonization and War Resistance Commission has announced that Israeli officials have given the green light to build 560 units in the illegal settlement of Mitzad, more than 10 kilometers south of Jerusalem. In a statement to a Palestinian news agency, activist Hassan Breje added that the announcement came just days after Israeli authorities endorsed a plan for the construction of 90 new illegal units in the Ibi Hanahal settlement. He also stated that Israel's increased settlement expansion activities are clearly aimed at forcing Palestinians from their land with the intention of merging the huge illegal settlements. Israel annexed East Jerusalem during the Six-Day War, in a move which has never been formally recognized by the international community. The city is claimed by both Palestinians and Israelis as their capital. Palestinians are calling for support from the international community to rebuild what was destroyed in the Gaza Strip following the Israeli regime's latest attacks. Before the ceasefire took hold, Israeli airstrikes and artillery fire on Gaza killed 254 Palestinians, including 66 children, and wounded more than 1,900 people in 11 days of bombardment, as reported by the Health Ministry in Gaza. The UN Human Rights Council decided on Thursday to establish an open-ended international investigation into violations surrounding the latest Gaza violence and into systematic abuses in the Palestinian territories and against Palestinians inside Israel.
Which war are you talking about? This was not a war, but a massacre. Our generation has lived through 4 wars, but we have never seen anything like this one. It was not a war, but a massacre. They destroyed, dispersed and displaced us. We had airstrikes, warplanes and tankers on one side, and on the other our children were scared and we lost our loved ones.
We asked the world to stand with us and not leave us like this. Our homes were destroyed and now we live in the streets. We need home and beds to sleep in. We also need flour, as the supplies that are given to us are not enough for the people. Try to support us, as the situation is really difficult.
Egypt has announced it will help rebuild Gaza after the Israeli occupying army bombarded the coastal territory for 11 consecutive days. The Egyptian government will collaborate in the reconstruction of infrastructure in the Gaza Strip following the ceasefire reached on May 21st. The construction works will be focused on water and electricity supply networks, as well as repairing roads and buildings in the Strip, infrastructure that was damaged after hundreds of air raids. The Egyptian Business Association announced that most of the companies participating in the efforts will be from the private sector, but will work under state supervision, while the services of local companies will also be hired.
Egyptian developers will be elected based on their past experience in national mega projects in Egypt and other Arab countries. This initiative will bring hope back to Gaza and become a source of employment for young people in the district, because the Egyptian companies will hire Palestinian workers in the projects. It is also a good opportunity for the exchange of knowledge and experience in the fields of infrastructure and construction.
Several hundred Indonesians protested on Friday against US support for Israel outside the United States Embassy and the United Nations mission in Jakarta. Demonstrators marched from several mosques to a major street outside the embassy, carrying Palestinian and Indonesian flags. The rally was organised by the Indonesian Muslim Workers Movement and several other groups. Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim-majority nation, does not have formal diplomatic relations with Israel and has long been a strong supporter of Palestinians. President Joko Widodo condemned the recent Israeli aggressions against civilian targets in the Gaza Strip. In Myanmar, the armed conflict between rebels and the military junta has so far left some 120,000 people displaced. The figures were revealed by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. The report comes amid fighting between ethnic guerrillas and the Myanmar army following the military junta's seizure of power on February 1st of this year. The fighting has led to internal displacement due to the urgent need for basic necessities such as food, aid and medicine, according to the UN. At least 831 people have lost their lives as a result of brutal repression by security forces against peaceful demonstrations, according to figures from the Association for the Assistance of Political Prisoners. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us for all the latest news on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram, and you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.